Hello learners, I am Dr. Subodh Kesharvani, working with Indira Gandhi National Open University in School of Management Studies. The topic which I am going to talk today is interpretation of statistical data. This is part of our course called MCU3, Research Methodology and Statistical Analysis, and we are on the verge of talking as far as this particular course is concerned, Research Methodology and Statistical Analysis. We are on the verge of completing this particular course, which is with more focus on research methodology and statistical analysis. So as far as the definition of the statistical data is concerned, I think this statistical data is quite important because you talk about the hypothesis, you talk about the assumption, you talk about lot of analysis and interpretation. So definition of statistical data is quite important because it deals with the collection, analysis and interpretation of numerical data using the theory of probability, especially with methods for drawing inferences about characteristics of a population from examination of a random sample. So what exactly we have talked about in our preceding sessions, starting from the conceptual part of research methodology or the sampling, we have seen that this inferences is very important because one side there is a descriptive statistics, other side there is a inferential statistics. So inferential statistics more emphasize on the testing part. Either it could be the t-test or z-test or the chi-square test or different kinds of tests. It could be the one-tail test or two-tail test. So what we have observed that there is a great use of statistical data, and when you talk about statistics, you talk about the assumption, you talk about the presumption, you talk about the analysis which comes in your mind, because you have a population, you have a target population, and then you extract a small portion from that population and try to do the research and come to the conclusion by that. So what exactly we mean to say that this data varies from situation to situation. As when we are going to talk more about the statistical data, I think the statistical data is changing with the change of time. For someone the data could be the raw, for other one it could be the finished product. So it varies from situation to situation. For the future researchers, it could work as a secondary data, but for the present researcher, it can part and parcel of the primary data. So what I mean to say that this statistical data and their significance is going to play a very important role. And as a researcher, as a statisticians, we have to take into consideration that what exactly the importance are. So as far as this particular the title is concerned, this is part of the course called MCU3, Research Methodology and Statistical Analysis, and we are on the verge of finalizing this particular theme, because already we have talked a lot about the various aspects, starting from the hypothesis, the sampling, the research plan, research design, or the scaling techniques, or what are the things which can play a very important role, the trend analysis, all things we have covered in our preceding sessions. So a collection of numerical data, and future researchers will able to find out with the help of ROL, because ROL is very important, because review of literature is something which is also going to build a framework when you are going to start a research or do the statistics. So anyway, I am just concentrating on statistical data, and if you see this particular image, you will find out that we have a whole population, and from that we make a small circle. So this small circle is somewhere talking more about the representation of the whole population. Either it could be, and what we have observed that if we see this sample 3, we start with the sample 1, not representative, because what we have seen that it's not giving the full representation of the population. So that is the reason you find out the deviation in the final verdict. So that is where the statistics is more important, because when you apply the test, you have to be quite cautious that the manner you have to take the sample. If you have taken a wrong sample, you lead to a wrong conclusion. If you have taken a good sample, you get a result which could be somewhat having some certain significance. So anyway, I think and if you see this sample 3, I think this is more representative of the population. And then we have, if we talk about the sample, it's too small. So we have already have a very elaborative session which was much more focused on the small sample and large sample. And there is a great utility of small sample, because or the large sample depends on, because if you take a small sample, you can able to do the research in a very faster mode. But if you take a long sample, I think that it's really a cumbersome process, and time is going to be involved, and no doubt the cost is also going to be play a very important role. So in that case, what happened, your time frame is going to be affected by that. So anyway, we will talk more about, in an ideal world, to test the hypothesis. Hypothesis we have already talked about, and we have seen that how the hypothesis is bifurcated into null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. And this is very important because it's talk more about the assumption, and if your hypothesis statement is fine, I think your journey towards reaching the goal is going to be finalized in a more systematic manner. So what we have observed, that if we talk about the statistical interpretation is an information gathering and learning process, and learn more about the observational phenomena. So what we have observed, we try to interpret the results on the basis of that, and then we reach to the conclusion. So statistical interpretation is an information gathering and learning process. It's a routine process, rather we can say, because and it's not like that you have interpreted the things at one juncture and you are going to stop yourself and come to the conclusion. So it need to be a routine phenomena which can go on and on after certain intervals. So when researchers start the research, I think that research, if considered as a long-term goal, it need to be bifurcated into certain short-term goals, and these short-term goals are going to tackle in a more elaborative manner, in a more systematic manner. So statistical interpretation talks about the observed phenomena, informed decisions and actions, how we are going to decide, and then you are going to act on that. So testing is something we have seen that in our preceding sessions, in our a lot of sessions when we talk about the concepts, we talk about building the blocks. There we have seen that we have developed the phenomena, and then afterwards we start testing. So testing believes in executing the things, and there are certain the methods, or there are certain tests which are there. We have already talked about the testing of hypothesis. Learn more about the real world situations, because trend is changing. There was a time when we are in a one mode, but if you talk about the business world is changing with the change of time. So what we observed, that this online phenomena had come up. We are moving away from the brick and mortar systems, and so this all have given a way to the consumers to think differently. So when you think different, when you are applying more technology, I think the old philosophy is going to become redundant. So that is where the interpretation also more important, that what exactly the demand is from the respondent side. So if the respondents reciprocates in a different manner, you have to develop a questionnaire in that format. So if you have a stereotype way of making a questionnaire, what is going to happen, that you are not going to reach to a conclusion what you are expecting. So contextual knowledge is more important, and this PP DAC is very important, because talk about the problem, plan, data analysis, conclusion, cycles for use for the activity. So problem is the statement of the research question, planning the procedure used to carry out the study, data, the data collection process, analysis, this summarizes and analyze the data to answer the question, and conclusion is there where you are going to recapitulate or sum up all those things what you have done. So there are certain caution with respect to statistical interpretation, because if your interpretation is not up to the mark, I think you are not in a position to accumulate all those things, because it's when you talk about the interpretation, you have to talk from underneath to pinnacle. It's not like that you can focus on one segment and you can leave the other segment. So involving interpreting the statistical constants, it is most difficult and skill requiring stage, and it is a stage that statistics seems to be very much viable to be misused. So how you are going to talk about all those pitfalls, because there are certain time when you follow a favorable situation, but after certain time you observe that adverse situation also comes up. So how you are going to come out from those adverse situations, that need to be talk about when you are going to interpret the statistics. So correct interpretation of results will lead to a valid conclusion of the study, and hence can aid in taking correct decisions, because in statistics the whole statistics that talks about the presumption or assumption, and presumption and assumption is based on a very small portion. So in our preceding session we have talked about that there is a cake, and you are just taking a slice of the cake, and and you are going to taste the slice and judge what exactly the whole cake is all about. So this is basically the interpretation where you're not going to explore the whole population, but focus more on the interpreting the things in a more statistical manner, in a more systematic manner, or in a more methodical manner. So a lot of algorithm, lot of mathematics are going to be applied. So it's the improper interpretation may lead to wrong conclusion and may the whole objective of the study unless. So data collection is the process of collecting and measuring information about variables of our interest. And if you see this particular circle, I think the mid is the statistical interpretation, and there is data mining. We have seen that in technology we are more talking about the data warehouse, data mining, or the business intelligence. Now this phenomena had come up where you are going to make storage of the data and extract the data as per your convenience, as per your needs. So, and research methodology we have already talked about a lot, and this research methodology is nothing but the methods which you are going to use. And there is no rocket science, there is no thumb rule, but with the change of time, with the change of pace, you have to develop a model, you have to develop a pedagogy where this research methodology is going to fit. So research planning is very important, because if you're not going to plan, if you're not going to forecast, ultimately you are not going to visualize yourself in a more manner the way you have to do. So statistical, the data collection is there. Either it could be the primary data collection or the secondary data collection. The pedagogy need to be developed in such a manner that both the the data are very important. It's not like that you every time you emphasize on the first hand information and you are not cater the existing information which are available in the form of secondary data. So the data collection pedagogy need to be framed, and meta-analysis is there. When you talk about what exactly the meta, there are data, there are metadata and there are big data. So the today word is more talking about the big data, because the big data is more talking on the real-time scenario, the real-time data. So statistical transcription is there, report generation is there. We in our coming sessions, we are going to talk about the statistical peer reviewing process is there, how we are going to review the data, because peer review, when you talk about the review, it's how you are going to recapitulate yourself. But peer review is basically the group of people come together and do the peer analysis. So this is basically the statistical peer review process, and data analysis is there. So data analysis is something which is very important, because if the today's scenario is more talking about the gigantic data. There was a time when you have a data which could be in a shape of a static manner, but right now the data is quite agile, data is quite dynamic. So how you are going to do the analysis? If you are not going to do the analysis on a routine manner, on a regular manner, I think that you become redundant and someone else can take the mileage. So that is where the things are going to be done in that way. And statistical interpretation is imperative to statistical analysis, and it is primarily means making sense from data that has been collected and interpreting it from a statistical standpoint eventually help in achieving the study objectives. So what your objective is, that is more important, and how this objective is going to come if we go into a backdrop and recapitulate ourselves. We have seen that this literature review is going to play a very vital role, and if your literature is review process is done, I think you extract a lot of the gaps, and these gaps are converted into objectives which later can take a form of the questionnaires which can be sent to the respondents to reciprocate on that. So this is the way a layer which can go on. The first layer talks about the literature review in a massive manner, because more the literature you review, more you can get to know what exactly the trend is going on, what exactly the scenario is. So this is all about, and when you're talking about this particular thing, I think you start with the problem, that define the problem, investigate questions, then plan what to measure, study design, variables, collect and clean data is there, then the analysis is there. Analysis can be used with the help of technology. Either you can use the MATLAB, eViews, or the aspirations software, or R is there, which is right now latest trend which is coming up, and then you answer certain questions with the help of conclusion. So the whole cycle goes on. It's not like that you can make this cycle once a while. It can go on. It's a routine manner, what I have talked in the preceding sessions, that it can go on and on always. So anyway, I think if you go into a backdrop and recapitulate ourselves, I think
we have a very elaborative sessions, and a huge number of sessions had been taken, and talking more about the research and data collection, which was the first block, and more focus on the collecting of data, then processing and preservation of data, how we are going to preserve the data, because whatever we have studied, how we are going to mug up, that is more important. So processing and preservation of data is more talking about the way you are going to preserve, and so that is where data mining, data warehouse, or the storage of data is quite important. And then the relational and trend analysis is there. In this particular session, we have seen that how the time series, index number, correlation, or the regression is very important, and how the dependent variable are linked with one another, or independent variable are taken care. So this whole block was more focusing on the probability and hypothesis testing. And this, if we go into the backdrop, we find out there are certain tests. So this fourth block was more talking about the executing the thing. The first block was more focused on the building the concepts. Second was how you are going to start working on that. Third is knowing the trend analysis, like applying the correlation or regression, because it can give you the trend. It can provide you a way what could be the shape of the data, because there was a time when we totally rely on the textual data, but after certain time the pictorial kind of the information come up, where the graphical presentation of data were there, and after certain time you find out, if we talk in the present scenario, the 2020, I think this the trend had been changed, where the video presentation is coming up. So more real-time approach is coming up, and data is changing very fast. Very fastly you will find out that data is going to be changed. So this is where the trend analysis is very important. And then probability and hypothesis testing is there, which is more focused on the certain test, how the hypotheses are going to be accepted, rejected, or how the test is going to check the reliability or validity of the testing what we had done. So that is basically the particular block. And fifth block consists of the two component, that is interpretation of statistics, and then research report writing. So the first discussion is more emphasized on interpretation, and then further we are going to talk about the reporting, how we are going to document all those things, so that it can take a shape of a DPR, or the detailed project report, or the research report, which can be useful for the future researchers or the future learners. So if you see into the backdrop, you will find out that interpretation of statistical data is more talking about what exactly the interpretation is, essentials of interpretation, precautions in interpreting the things, concluding remarks, conclusion and generalization is there, and then methods of generalization is very important, because it more talk about logical methods and statistical method. And then statistical fallacies are there. There are certain the pitfalls, and there are certain things, because when you apply the statistics, you are reached to the conclusion, but that conclusion is quite flamboyant in nature. You can reach up to 95% or 98%. Again, that is called the significance. So, but you can't get the result which could be 100%, because there is a population, there is a universe, and you extract certain information from there. So the intention is very clear that you take a small portion from that and try to reach to the conclusion. So if we have applied the methods of sampling, we have seen that how this non-probability sampling, or the random sampling and non-random sampling differs, because somewhere we apply the judgmental method, somewhere we apply the convenient sampling, or somewhere we apply the model which is there. So anyway, researchers usually cannot make direct observations of every unit of the population they are studying, for a variety of reasons. Instead, they collect data from a subset of population, a sample, and use these observations drawn to make inferences about the entire population. So ideally, the characteristics of a sample should correspond to the characteristics of a population from which the sample was drawn. So the conclusion drawn from the sample is probably applicable to the entire population. This is something which is there. Now the question is that why interpretation is going to come up. A researcher, statistician, is expected not only to collect and analyze the data, but also to interpret the results. Because if you are not going to interpret the results, you are not going to reach to the conclusion. So interpretation is very important. It's like giving the final touch to what you have done in due course of time, during this a long span, a short span. Because when you start a research, when you start writing a paper, I think the time frame could be 6 months or a year. But when you make a dissertation, when you make a thesis, I think you make a mind that you're going to accomplish this task in a prescribed time frame. So 3 years could be the minimum, or 5 years could be the maximum. So this analysis is going to done because when you're going to talk more about all those things, I think interpretation is very important, because interpretation is essential for the simple reason that usefulness and utility of research finding lie in proper interpretation. It is only through interpretation that the researcher can expose relations and patterns, and in case of hypothesis testing, we study the researcher may arrive at the generalization. So generalization is something which we are going to take care in this particular session in a more elaborative manner. So in case the researcher had no hypothesis start, he would try to explain the finding on the basis of some theory, and that is another way of explaining the things. And then you're going to find out the conclusion. So essentials for interpretation, if we are going to talk about, the data need to be homogeneous, and we have already talked about the measurement and scaling techniques, and where we have seen that how we are going to measure the things. So there must be a homogeneity. You can't, there must be certain units which can quite homogeneous in nature. If you are talking in terms of the meters, I think the meter could be the benchmark for that, and unitization could be done on the basis of the calculation of units. So data are adequate, the data need to be suitable, and data are properly classified and tabulated. In our the preceding sessions, we have seen that how we are going to classify the data and how we are going to tabulate the data, because we have already talked about that data size is increasing with the change of time, and it's going to become a quite gigantic in nature. So if you are going to tabulate the data, I think the interpretation part is quite easier. You can very easily see the table and find out what could be the trend is, and then you can convert these table into the pictorial format. You can make a bar chart, you can make a pie chart, and then this pie chart and bar chart can quite visualized and can give you the clear glimpse about what could be the trend of the scenario is. So data are scientifically analyzed, and there are certain the analysis which you are going to apply, and precautions in interpretation. I think when we are going to interpret the thing, I think the following precautions are quite important. The interpreter must be quite objective. It's not like that you can there must be some rules and regulations which one has to follow, and they are quite adhere to that. And the interpreter must understand the problem in its proper perspective. And I think that diagnosing a problem is very important, and that is the reason when we have started talking more about the research methodology and statistical analysis, we have more emphasis on the problem part. So every incidence starts with a problem. When you diagnose, when you know the problem, which can call as a gap, then you start a journey. So if you have able to understand the problem, you can find out what exactly the gap is. I think the 50% of the battle you have achieved, and then other 50% can be done with the help of the mathematics or algorithm we are going to use. So appreciate the relevance of various elements of problem. Relevant, adequate and accurate data are collected, and data are properly classified and analyzed. So already we have studied about all those things, and whether the data are subject to limitations or make interpretation that go beyond the information and data. So sometimes what happens, we do the forecasting, which can also work as a driving force for the future researchers. So that is also quite important. And then concluding remarks on interpretation. The task of interpretation is not an easy job. It requires skill, and interpretation is an art that one learns through practice and experience. The researcher may seek the guidance of experts, their mentors. If they are pursuing their doctoral program, they can in touch with their supervisor, with their mentors, and their mentors can able to provide them or navigate them how they can initiate the process. So the researcher must accomplish the task of interpretation only after considering all relevant factors affecting the problem to avoid false generalization, and should not conclude with evidence, should not draw hasty conclusions, and should take all possible precautions for proper interpretation of data. So this is basically and when you interpret, I think then the generalization conclusion part comes. And there is a very famous quotation which says that prediction is at the heart of almost every scientific discipline and the study of generalization. Because if we go into the backdrop and find out that this hypothesis is nothing but an assumption or presumption that we start, and we start with two statements. One statement is the null hypothesis, which we usually call the null hypothesis, and other is called the alternate hypothesis. So if null hypothesis is accepted, the alternate rejected. If alternate accepted, the null is rejected. So this is what exactly the prediction is. So, and based on the prediction, we take an opinion of the respondents. We float the questionnaires to the respondents, and respondents reciprocate either in the close-ended format or in the open-ended format. And then what exactly we used to do, we try to accumulate the whatever the results which had come from the respondents' verdict come from, and we try to accumulate all this. So generalization is an essential component of the wider scientific process. In an ideal world, to test a hypothesis, you would sample an entire population, and that is the reason we have studied in sampling that when to go for the random sampling, when to go for convenient sampling, and if data size is very high, we can convert it into clusters, or we apply the stratified random sampling where we make a group, we make a strata, and then do it. And sometimes what happens, we are not going to get the result in the manner we supposed to do, and because the respondents are not reciprocating, in that case we apply the snowball methodology, because this snowball methodology provide us a platform to give us a reference of the respondents. So it is what allows researchers to take away, and they have learned a small scale and relate it more broadly in a bigger picture. So generalization in research, if you are going to talk about, I think we have observations, we have described study, we have results and data, and then testing environment is there. And then from that, this testing observation, we test hypothesis, possible implications are there, statistical analysis are there, and then assessment is there. We study biasness, errors, or that is the reason we apply certain tests. We see the type 1 error, type 2 error, and then draw conclusions suggestive for future studies, and then real world phenomena is there. So what we observe that all those things are quite linked with one another. And if we more talk about the statistical generalization, it involves inferring the results from a sample and applying it to a population. To do this, the sample must be selected randomly and be representative of the population. So that is the manner, or we can apply the methods of sampling which we have studied in our preceding session. So generalization is a statement, the scope of which is wider than the available evidence, and important to display accurately the underlying distribution of data. Data is generalized to search for a special pattern, and if the data is not properly generalized, the message may be obscured. So this is the way by which, and if you talk about what is the difference between a fact and a statistical generalization, a fact is based on a really assumption, and a statistical generalization based on the values. So faulty generalization is there. There are many ways in which the relationship between generalization and specific instances can be abused, and one of the more common one is overgeneralize from an unrepresentative group. So the figure can quite self-explanatory. And if we more talk about the generalization type, I think the scientific generalization is there. Scientific generalization based on the evidence of causal connection is called scientific generalization. Like all crows are black is based on causal connection between brownness and blackness. And if we talk about the empirical generalization based on the evidence of experience, like all red mangoes supposed to be sweet. So there are we can say two methods of generalization, that is logical methods and statistical methods. If we talk about the logical methods, which are also known as the learning methods, it could be inductive, deductive, analytical and synthetic. And if we talk about inductive, I think comparison, experiment and generalization is the deductive is general principles to particular aspect, and then division, classification to know the object as a whole. If we talk about the analytical, and then synthetic is study the phenomena from parts to understand the whole. So if we talk about the statistical method, which we have already covered, because the whole statistics is bifurcated into descriptive statistics and inferential statistics, we have a session which was much more focused on descriptive statistics, and we have seen that how this univariate or bivariate or multivariate things are there. If we talk about like the shape, center, spread, relative positions are there, and correlation, regression or multiple regression is there. And when we talk about the inferential statistics, we have started applying the significance, what are the significance, or the how this t-test and nova test are quite useful. So the statistical method involves 4 steps: collection of data, presentation of data, analysis of data, and interpretation of data. So this whole discussion which we focus starting from the ground zero, And as far as the today discussion is concerned, it is nothing but a statistical method which we have talked about. So I think by that I am going to winding up this particular session, and I hope the learners have enjoyed talking more about the interpretation, because this interpretation is nothing but how you are going to visualize. It's rather, we can say, it's a mapping. So if you have mapped the things somewhere, if you have visualized the thing, I think the vision or the forecasting is very important. And when the whole world is changing very fast, the way things are changing, the technology is knocking a door, and every juncture you find out the new technology is coming up. Either it could be the business or learning. You find out the machine is going to play a very important role, because the artificial intelligence, machine learning. So that is where the statistics is very important, because you are presuming the thing and you are expecting that could going to happen in future. So this is all about the discussion what we have in coming sessions. We are going to talk more about all those things, and if the learners want to go through or face any issues in the particular terminologies, they can just recapitulate our past video, and they can able to find out the terms, because when you talk about the statistics, you have to talk about certain terms which are quite omnipresent in nature and which are coming when you are doing anything, it coming in a regular basis. So understanding the terminology is very important, because these terminologies are frequently used after certain time when you are going to apply these procedures or methodologies. Thank you very much. Thank you.